Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Art Is You podcast. I'm your host, Carly Scott, and today we are talking about becoming the observer of yourself. And I'm really excited to record this episode because I feel like this concept can change your life if you have not already been introduced to it or had it explained in a way that really makes sense to you. If you are the observer of yourself and you've been doing that for a long time, that's amazing. I learned about this concept probably about 5 years ago, and it has taken me a while to fully let it sink in and also start applying it and using it in my own life. It's been I guess a slow process for me, but this concept of becoming the observer of yourself, I feel is kind of just the key to completely changing your life. Once you start observing yourself, you have no choice once you're noticing certain things to change, So let's start by chatting about what it means to be the observer of yourself. So essentially it's just noticing, observing your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, without immediately judging them, and also without just assuming they're true. This is something I used to do where thoughts would come in, and if I had a bad thought, I would think I was a bad person, even though I'd be why did I think that, or what? Or I just think random things. You think pointless things sometimes. If you're like me, you have a constant stream of thoughts, just your brain's always moving, and it can be really loud and stressful sometimes, especially if you are listening to those irrational thoughts or anxiety thoughts or whatever, which I used to do. I used to listen to those irrational or paranoid thoughts, and it was not good. So becoming the observer of those is removing yourself almost a layer from the thoughts and witnessing them, again, without judging. And I would say doing this with compassion is probably the best way to do it, as far as just being really gentle with yourself, because this is difficult work, and at least I shut down if I start to be harsh with myself. I'll just completely shut down, and so, or it just sends me into not a good place. So it's important to be compassionate with yourself through this process. In the beginning, it's so important to be compassionate, because that's when it'll be your first time witnessing yourself thinking these thoughts and really just observing yourself, and you might not like everything that you notice about yourself. And so having compassion and looking through the lens of curiosity, there it is, curiosity of why do I have this nagging thought, or why do I act this way? Why did I get triggered by that? Why do I have this bad habit? Whatever it is, your emotional responses to things, your emotions, getting curious and then observing with a compassionate lens, not judgmental, and not even maybe needing to know the answer, because when you start observing yourself, there will be things that you're I just straight up do not know why or where that is coming from, as far as why do I think that? Why do I act like that? Why do I believe that? And it'll be hard with some things to even know why, but it's still important to observe them, because essentially what you're doing is allowing yourself to fully pay attention and be honest with yourself from a more, I don't know if it's more objective when you take a step back. I think it like helps a little bit create some distance, but it's almost like you're allowing space to make a choice. That's what it is. Like, you're allowing some space, you're noticing your thoughts, the way you act, and then you're giving yourself space to make a choice about it. Of like, okay, is that something I want to keep doing? Or is this like a behavior I want to change? Is this a thought pattern or a belief system I want to change? Is this a way of showing up that I want to change? And there can be so many things. And so again, especially in the beginning, this is super overwhelming because you might realize you want to like change everything, or just a lot of things that are very overwhelming and might feel impossible to change. But the rewarding part of this journey is like, the more you stick with it and the longer you do it, you get these little rewards of, whoa, like, I used to respond this way when this happened, and now I'm pausing and I'm making a better, healthier choice for myself. And even if that's just in one tiny area of your life, it will give you this gratification and rewarding feeling of like, I did that. I made that change. I was able to essentially like overcome something that like really was bothering me or nagging at me, or, you know, an inconvenience in my life or whatever it is, like a bad habit. Those little wins will start to make you realize like, it's okay that like I'm not fixing everything right away, because we'll never be fixed like all the way. Like, there's just always going to be issues, you know. It's just unfortunate, but it's the way it is. But it'll be like, okay, but life is a little bit better with that little bit of extra space and awareness I've created for myself. Like, I'm able to help myself out a little bit more than before. And those little bit mores like will be the thing that keeps you going. So in the beginning, when you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much to change, and like, like, why do I act like that? Or like, you know, for me, I realized, first of all, that like there was a lot of things I was doing that I was like, shoot, I did not even realize like I did that, or I didn't realize that me doing that impacted other people in that way. And just kind of having to come to terms with the fact that like my actions and certain things that I've done or said or whatever have hurt other people. And also that I really struggle with the idea of being like bad or wrong, and learning that it is actually okay to be bad and wrong sometimes, or like do the wrong thing sometimes, I guess, as far as everybody makes mistakes, and I need to be willing to just like own it when I make a mistake, instead of being like so afraid that that will mean I'm like bad as like a person, instead of just like I made a bad choice and I should own up to it and apologize for it. And I do tend to be someone who like over apologizes too, but yeah, I think it's part of like that fear of being so afraid of like being bad or being wrong. It's like, I'm like, I promise I'm not trying to be bad, like I'm trying so hard to be good, but then I like, of course I make mistakes, I'm human, everybody does, and like I need to be able to like be present for like me being the one who messed up in situations. And again, that not meaning I'm like a bad person, but like, yeah, just I guess being able to honestly observe myself and say there are moments. And when I started to observe for the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that are like not great about like the way I'm showing up, or the way I'm thinking about myself, the way I'm treating myself. Like, I realized I had a lot of self-destructive habits, and like still do. I'm still, you know, always a work in progress, but just I wasn't even aware before of certain habits I had that were self-destructive, or that certain behaviors I did were like pushing other people away or just anything. Like, I just wasn't aware of any of it, I guess. And becoming aware of those things, again, it can be so overwhelming, but it's a process, and starting on the process is what like starts that like major change in your life. It's kind of just like, you know, once you know something or see something, you can't unknow it or unsee it. And that's how it is when you start to observe yourself. Once you start to observe like negative patterns you have, you can't unsee it. And so what happens for me, because I'm a very stubborn person and like very slow when it comes to change, like I get scared of change, and I also am just like stubborn and resistant to things. But okay, so for me this has looked like essentially noticing a bad pattern and still doing that bad thing even though I've noticed it and observed it for a very long time. But there becomes a point with certain things that I start to get so sick of it, as far as like, now that I'm aware of it and I've really let myself like think about the damage this is causing, or like the, you know, self-destructiveness of it, then eventually it starts to become something that you're like just sick of, and you're like, why do I keep doing this? Like, it clearly does not go well for me when I do this over and over again. So like, maybe I should just like stop. You know? So that's the beauty of starting to observe things, is before, when there was maybe like no hope of change because you're like so set in your ways, all of a sudden you start to observe and pay attention to like what you're actually doing and the effects that that is having. Which, you guys, I feel like this is just how we should all operate all the time. And I don't know why we're not really like taught from the time we were children how this works, like literally. So I'm trying to like talk about it and just be like, here, you guys, like literally just start observing yourself. Start paying attention, because I just wish someone had told me this, and I wish they had like repeated it over and over again to me until I got it in my head, which is kind of what happened eventually. But start paying attention to how you act, how you think, how you talk to yourself, and then also how your actions and behaviors affect you and other people. Like, it's so obvious, and I know for some people this is so obvious and they've been doing it their whole life, but I don't know if it was like growing up the way I did. I don't know about like if it was the environment or just what, but like I just did not do this. And the people around me didn't seem to be really doing this either, or talking about it at all. So trying to think what else I want to say about this topic. I should reference my notes. Now is when I lose my train of thought. Okay. Why it matters. It helps break unconscious patterns and reactions. So essentially that stuff I was saying, a lot of those responses that we have, the thoughts we have, are just our reactions to an overwhelming world and just things coming at us, you know? And we're just reacting. A lot of what those behaviors are, before you start observing yourself, are just unconscious, and you're not really, like, you might think that's the thing. It's like, before I knew about this, like maybe I thought I was aware and like self-aware and aware of what I was doing, and like I was aware of certain things, like for sure. And like I thought, you know, I was super concerned about other people, but it was in the way of like people pleasing, as far as like just was afraid other people wouldn't like me, and it was very much like survival mode type reacting to everything in my life. And then when you start to become the observer, it helps you stop just reacting sorry, I keep on like having these like small burps while I'm talking. Apologies. But essentially, becoming the observer of yourself allows you to pause before you react, or, you know, observe as you're reacting. So in the future, eventually, because again, this takes a lot of time, at least it did for me. I think some people can do this a lot faster than others. Anyway, it takes a lot of time for me. But noticing the reactions, eventually being able to notice them early enough that you're noticing like the pre-signs of it, and being able to like almost catch yourself even before it happens, or in the moment, just noticing like, oh, I'm not going to respond the way I used to respond to this. Like, once that starts happening, it just feels like such a win, because you're like, wait, it's working. Because at first it's just like, wait, I'm observing all this stuff, but I'm not changing. Like, am I just like a terrible person that I'm now aware of this and like I still can't figure out how to change? That's how I feel, at least. And like, I know I'm not alone in it being difficult to change like patterns that you've been living out for so long. But I also do feel guilty a lot of the time when I'm like, I'm aware of this. I probably should just be able to turn it off now, right? And it's really hard to change patterns and behaviors and habits and all of that stuff. So there's a lot that like I've been observing for years now that I have not been able to like change, or I've only been able to like make small progress on. And other areas where I've been able to make quite a bit of progress, which is amazing. And so it's not a perfect journey, but this will change your life, you guys, if you start observing yourself. And I just feel like it's the key to like having a better life, honestly. Because like, how can you know what to change or how to change it, or like how to like make a choice for yourself if you're not even aware of like what you're doing and the impact it's having on you? Like, it is so helpful. It is so helpful. Okay. Any other notes I want to talk about? It's super important to be compassionate with yourself throughout this whole process. And instead of trying to like fix yourself, I really struggle with this, just seeking to understand yourself better. And again, just be curious, compassionate, open. That's what you need. I know it's tempting to be like, I'm broken, I need to be fixed. And I think a lot of us are like taught that way. And so again, that's just like another habit and pattern I've been having to learn how to break. Because in a lot of ways, noticing these things about myself has made me feel like, oh, I'm so broken, I'm so messed up, and like, I'm just, yeah, so terrible, essentially. Unhelpful thoughts. So clearly, like, that idea of like, I need to be fixed or I'm broken is kind of like, again, adding to that like self-destruction. Like, it's just not good. And so it's better to have the attitude of just like, I'm just trying to understand myself better. I'm just trying to be a little nicer to myself. And maybe I've done some bad things, but like, maybe I can be curious about what inspired that action. Where was that coming from? What insecurity was I acting out of? And do I resonate with that anymore? Do I want to be insecure about that if it's going to make me treat other people that way? No. It's really hard to not be insecure anymore when you've been insecure your whole life. But maybe I can work on feeling more secure so I don't treat people out of like my insecurity. I can treat people out of security, you know? I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, where are these thoughts coming from? Like, I think about this stuff all the time, and then when I sit down to talk about it, I'm just like, whoa, wait, that actually made a lot of sense to me. But hopefully it did to you too. Let's see if I have anything else. Ooh, okay, so starting to observe yourself can start to like help connect you with your inner child and also like your future self. And what I mean by that is once you start really paying attention to yourself, you can notice when like your inner child is triggered by something that happened to you when you were younger or whatever is triggered, and you can like learn to nurture your inner child when they get triggered instead of essentially doing more damage to them or just repeating the same like trauma patterns, as far as like shutting that inner child down or being like, you can't react that way, or like you can't have that emotion, or you can't feel that way. Shutting them down, kind of like the way you probably experienced when you were younger if you have that like trauma pattern, versus learning to switch that and be compassionate with your inner child's reaction of like they're triggered by something and so they're having, you know, they burst into tears or they got angry or whatever. Instead of shutting them down right away, getting curious, being compassionate, asking where it's coming from, and being gentle with it, instead of, just trying to shut it down. It's like, oh, that's broken, it needs to be fixed. Instead, just being curious, and then maybe realizing like, oh, I'm actually very valid for feeling that way, but maybe there's another way I can either express this or like just kind of, again, taking the space to respond instead of just react. So, you know, you don't have to react out of anger in a way that like hurts someone else. It could be like, maybe it's so valid for you to be angry about this and you're gonna write like a poem about it, because that's what I do sometimes when I'm really mad. I write a poem about how mad I am. Okay, so there's like healthier ways to deal with things sometimes, you know? Okay. Oh, and the higher self thing, if this might be a little weird for some people, I don't know, but for me, I started working with like my inner child first, because that made a lot of sense, because it's like I used to be her, so it's like she existed at one point. Future self is a little more like it's in the future, so it's a little more like in your imagination, I guess. But essentially, if you have visions for the future, goals for the future, aspirations, if you want to live a little longer, then essentially you have a future self, right? Because there's a future version of you. And depending on like what you want to do with your life and where you want to go in your life, you can essentially like leave room, this is gonna sound weird to some people, leave room for that like future self to also I guess like inspire you. I don't know, this might sound weird, but just like the way your inner child can get triggered, there's like a positive thing too, where it's like you can leave room to connect with your future self of like, you know more than me, future self. You're further along in your journey. Like, where should I go? What should I do? Like, how did we get so confident? How did we, buy that house? How did we, whatever? Like, I don't know. Again, might be weird for some people. I'm not an expert on this. This is just something that, like, again, becoming the observer of myself has just opened me up to these things, because I'm like, I'm paying more attention now. I don't even know. Hopefully this part isn't too weird for you guys. Okay. Becoming the observer of yourself isn't always comfortable. It may bring up things you've been avoiding. So, uncomfortable feelings will come up. You're doing it right. It's okay. You're doing it right. Okay. And then shifting your identity. You're not your thoughts. You're not your emotions. You're the awareness behind them. Okay? I used to really struggle with disconnecting from like my thoughts and emotions, as far as like separating myself, my identity from them, and letting them like come in and out and pass through, and yeah, again, observing and making choices about like what I want to do that feels in alignment with me instead of just reacting, and then dealing with the aftermath after I've had like a reaction that I didn't even think through. I was just, you know, reacting out of survival mode, I feel like usually comes from a place of like fear. So it's like you're being defensive, or you're being just like, or you're like the opposite of defensive, like offensive, I don't know. But like you're just acting out of a place of fear. And that is something that can usually like end up hurting other people, because you're not making the best choices usually when you're acting out of fear. And as someone who's a very scared person, acting out of fear has been like a hard pattern to break for me, for sure. And like still something I'm working on, but I feel like I've been able to make a lot of choices that, like, you guys, this is where the higher self comes in, or like the future self. Like my future self is like recording podcasts confidently and all this stuff, and it's like that's how I was able to start doing this, was because even though I knew there'd be like a beginning version of me, I also knew there'd be a future version of me who was further along, better at it, and had more experience. How'd she get that experience? By being a beginner and look at a fool. Okay? So, okay, I'm trying to think if I have any other thoughts. Yeah, you're not your emotions, you're the awareness behind them. You're not your thoughts, you're the awareness behind them. Hopefully this episode was helpful to you in some way, shape, or form. I really enjoy talking about this stuff, you guys, like so much. If this is like helpful, if this is fascinating to you, please let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you want to hear more about. Leave a review, leave a comment, message me, do whatever you want, whatever your little heart desires. Like this video if you want to, and I will talk to you guys next week. I love you so much. Bye.